She didn't reject you to lose you. She rejected you to see who you really are. That moment when she says no, pulls away, or makes it clear she's not interested, it feels final. It feels like a decision that's already been made, something you have no control over anymore. And because of that, most men treat it exactly like that. They assume it's over or worse. They assume they need to fight against it. They try to change her mind. They explain themselves. They push harder, thinking effort will turn things around. And in doing that, they unknowingly confirm the very thing she was testing, because rejection in many cases isn't just about interest, it's about reaction. It's a moment where she gets to see how you handle pressure, how you respond when things don't go your way, whether your confidence is real or just surface level. And the truth is, most people fail this moment without even realizing it's happening. They react emotionally, they take it personally, they try to fix it immediately as if the rejection is something that needs to be corrected. And in that reaction, they reveal something deeper, that their sense of self is tied to her approval. That's what lowers value, not the fact that you care, but the way you express it when things don't go your way. Because when you chase after rejection, when you try to argue with it or convince her otherwise, you're showing that you're not comfortable standing on your own decision, your own direction. You're asking for permission to be chosen. But when you handle rejection differently, when you don't react impulsively, when you don't chase, when you don't try to immediately regain control, you send a completely different message. You show composure, not because you don't feel anything, but because you don't let that feeling control your behavior. You accept what was said without turning it into a moment of weakness. You don't try to force a different outcome. You simply acknowledge it and move forward. And that's where the shift happens, because now, instead of confirming her expectations, you disrupt them. She expected a reaction, she expected effort, persuasion, maybe even frustration. But when none of that shows up, it creates something she didn't plan for: uncertainty. And uncertainty changes how the situation is processed. Because now, instead of feeling like she has full control over the outcome, she starts to question what just happened. Why didn't you react? Why didn't you try? Why did you accept it so easily? Those questions don't come from what you said, they come from what you didn't do. And that's what makes the moment powerful. Because rejection isn't always about the end of something, it's about the beginning of how you're perceived moving forward. And when you handle it with control instead of emotion, you change the entire narrative. Because the way you respond to rejection is the moment she starts seeing you differently. Right after rejection, everything inside you pushes you to respond. It feels uncomfortable to just sit with it. There's a strong urge to say something, anything that might change the situation. You want to explain yourself, clarify your intentions, maybe even convince her that she's making the wrong decision. And in that moment, it feels justified. It feels like effort, like persistence, like you're showing how much you care. But what most people don't realize is that your immediate reaction doesn't just express your feelings, it defines your value in that moment, because she's not just hearing your words, she's observing your behavior. When you react emotionally, when you try to argue, persuade, or seek a different outcome, you communicate something deeper than what you're saying. You show that you're not comfortable with the situation as it is, that you need it to change in order to feel okay. And that need lowers your position, not because wanting something is wrong, but because needing it to the point of reacting impulsively signals a lack of control. It shows that your emotional state is dependent on her response. And once that dynamic is visible, it shifts how you're perceived. You go from being someone she was considering to someone trying to be considered. That difference is everything. Because attraction isn't built on convincing, it's built on how someone carries themselves when there's nothing to gain. It's built on presence, stability, and confidence that doesn't need external validation to exist. And that's exactly what's lost when you react immediately. You remove the sense of mystery, the sense of independence, the sense that you're okay regardless of the outcome. You make it clear that her decision has control over your behavior. And that's what causes the shift in value. But when you respond differently, when you accept the rejection calmly, without resistance, without trying to change it, you create a completely different impression. You show self respect. You show that your direction doesn't depend on her approval, that you're not shaken by her decision, even if you feel something internally. And that level of control is rare, because most people don't have it. Most people react. They try to fix, adjust, or negotiate. But when you don't follow that pattern, it creates contrast. And contrast is what stands out. Instead of confirming her decision, you interrupt it, you make her pause because now she doesn't get the reaction she expected. She doesn't get the validation that her decision completely removed you from the equation. She's left with something unfinished, a version of the situation that doesn't fully align with what she thought would happen. And that's where things begin to change. Because the way you respond in that moment doesn't just end the interaction, it sets the tone for how you're remembered. Because your immediate reaction to rejection is the moment she decides how much you actually lost. When you don't respond after rejection, when you don't argue, don't chase, don't try to reopen the conversation, you leave something behind that most people don't realize the power of an unanswered question. Because in most situations, rejection comes with an expectation of closure. She expects a reaction, a response, something that confirms the decision she just made. Whether it's you trying to change your mind, showing disappointment, or even just acknowledging it with emotion, there's usually some form of completion to that moment. But when you stay silent, that completion never happens. And that's where the shift begins because now, instead of everything feeling settled, something feels unfinished. There's no clear ending, no predictable outcome, just a pause where something was supposed to happen but didn't. And the mind doesn't like that. The human mind naturally tries to make sense of incomplete situations. It searches for answers, looks for patterns, replays moments to figure out what's missing. And when there's no response from you, no explanation, no reaction, it creates a gap that she can't immediately fill. That gap becomes a source of curiosity. She starts asking herself questions she didn't expect to ask. Why didn't he react? Did he not care as much as I thought? Did I misread him? Is he really okay with this? These questions don't come from anything you said. They come from your silence, from the absence of what she expected to happen. And that absence creates mental engagement because now, instead of moving on with certainty, she's left with something unresolved, something that doesn't fully align with the narrative she had in her mind. And when it happens, attention shifts. She starts thinking about you, not because you're reaching out, not because you're trying to get her attention, but because there's something she doesn't understand. And what the mind doesn't understand, it keeps returning to. This is why silence can be more impactful than any response. Because when you respond, you give clarity, you provide closure, you make the situation easy to process, even if it's not in your favor. But when you don't respond, you leave room for interpretation. You allow her mind to fill in the gaps. And those gaps can't be controlled. They can grow into curiosity, into reflection, into a need to understand what just happened. And that process keeps you present in her thoughts, even when you're not physically there. This doesn't mean silence is a tactic to manipulate or force a reaction. It means that when you don't rush to complete the moment, you allow it to exist in a way that has depth. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is leave the question unanswered, because when she can't explain your silence is when she starts thinking about you the most. When most men face rejection, their first instinct is to fix it. They try to turn the situation around, to show more effort, to prove something that might change her decision. It comes from a place of wanting to be understood, wanting to keep the connection alive, wanting to not let the moment slip away. But that instinct, as natural as it feels, is exactly what makes them blend in, because that's what almost everyone does. They push, they explain, they chase. And in doing so, they show that their emotional state is tied to the outcome, that they're not comfortable walking away without trying to control what happens next. And that lack of comfort becomes visible. But when you do something different, when you don't react, when you don't try to fix, when you simply accept the rejection and move on, create a contrast that's hard to ignore, because now you're not following the pattern. You're not reacting the way she expected. You're not trying to change her mind. You're not seeking validation or closure through her response. You're simply steady, and that steadiness stands out, not in a loud, attention seeking way, but in a quiet, undeniable way. Because it shows something most people don't have, the ability to remain composed when things don't go their way. That's what signals strength, not physical strength, not forced confidence, but emotional strength. The kind that comes from being grounded in yourself, from knowing your value doesn't fluctuate based on someone else's decision. And that's rare, because most people don't operate from that place. Most people need some form of external validation to feel secure. So when they don't get it, they react. They try to regain control through effort. But when you don't do that, you show that your sense of self is internal. You're not shaken. You're not trying to prove anything. You're simply moving forward. And that creates a shift in perception because now, instead of being seen as someone who was rejected, you're seen as someone who walked away with control. Someone who didn't lose composure, didn't lower themselves to chase, didn't try to negotiate their value. And that changes how the moment is remembered because people don't just remember what happened, remember how it was handled. They remember the behavior, the energy, the presence that came with it. And when your response is calm, controlled, and grounded, it leaves an impression that doesn't fade quickly, not because you tried to make it impactful, but because it was different. Because in a world where most people react, the one who doesn't becomes impossible to ignore because when you walk away without trying to fix rejection is when she starts realizing she may have misjudged you. When you stay after rejection, when you keep trying, keep explaining, keep showing up, you're still present in a way that feels familiar. Even if she said no, your presence doesn't change much. You're still there, still engaging, still giving energy to the situation. And because of that, nothing really shifts. There's no difference for her to feel, no contrast between what was there before and what's there now. The interaction continues just with a different label attached to it. And in that continuation, the impact of your presence actually becomes weaker because now it's not something she has to think about, it's something she can rely on. But when you disappear, when you truly step back, not out of frustration, not out of ego, but out of self respect, you create a completely different experience. Now there's a gap, a real one. The conversations that used to happen don't exist anymore. The attention she received is no longer there. The energy that filled certain moments is gone, and that absence doesn't just sit quietly. It starts to be noticed. At first, it might feel small, a moment where she expects something that doesn't come, a situation where she would normally hear from you, but there's silence instead. It's subtle, but it's enough to register. And once it registers, it begins to grow because absence has a way of amplifying what presence could not. When you're always there, your presence blends into the background, becomes part of the routine. But when you're gone, that routine is disrupted. There's a break in what was expected, and that break creates awareness. She starts to notice what's missing, not just the conversations, but the consistency, the attention, the role you play in her day. And as that awareness builds, so does the emotional response tied to it. Because now, instead of experiencing you passively, she's experiencing your absence actively. She's thinking about it, wondering about it, trying to understand it. And that process keeps you present in a way that your constant presence never could. Because when something is gone, the mind naturally revisits it. It tries to reconstruct what was there to make sense of what changed. And in doing that, it keeps returning to you. This is why absence can feel louder than any words because it creates space for thought, for reflection, for realization. It allows her to feel the difference instead of just hearing about it. And that feeling can't be forced or explained. It has to be experienced, which is why sometimes the most powerful thing you can do after rejection is remove yourself completely. Because when your presence is no longer guaranteed, is when she starts to feel its value the most. At some point, you realize that the silence itself isn't what creates the impact, it's the place it comes from. Because silence used as a tactic can feel forced, temporary, even unnatural. But silence that comes from genuine detachment, that comes from truly letting go, is different. It's steady. It's not something you're using to get a reaction. It's something that reflects where you are internally. You're not waiting for her to reach out. You're not checking your phone, hoping something changes. You're not measuring your progress based on whether she notices your absence. You've simply moved forward, and that's where the real shift happens. Because when your silence is genuine, your behavior becomes consistent. You're not adjusting based on what she does. You're not breaking your composure the moment something unexpected happens. You're grounded regardless of the situation. That kind of detachment is rare. Most people say they moved on, but their actions still revolve all around the person they're trying to let go of. They still react, still check, still look for signs. And because of that, their behavior isn't stable, it fluctuates. But when you truly detach, that fluctuation disappears. You don't feel the need to prove anything. You don't feel the urge to explain your silence. You don't feel pulled back into the situation just because something reminds you of it. You're focused on your own direction. And that focus shows. Not through words, but through consistency. You become predictable in a different way, not emotionally reactive, but emotionally stable. You're not easy to read in the sense that you don't give immediate reactions, but you're clear in how you carry yourself, calm, composed, and grounded. And that creates a different kind of presence, one that isn't based on effort or attention, but on identity. Because when you're truly detached, you're not trying to make her think about you. You simply live in a way that doesn't revolve around her. And that independence naturally creates curiosity, not because you're trying to create it, but because you're not feeding into the usual patterns. You're not chasing, you're not reacting, you're not seeking validation. And that absence of neediness becomes noticeable. People pay attention to what they can't easily categorize. They think about what doesn't follow the usual script. And when your behavior doesn't fit the pattern she expected, it stays in her mind longer than anything predictable ever could. But by then, it doesn't matter because your focus isn't on her attention anymore, it's on your own growth. You're building something within yourself that doesn't depend on external outcomes. Your sense of value isn't tied to whether she comes back or realizes anything. It's grounded in who you've become. And that's what makes it real. Because when you stop needing her to understand your silence, is the moment your silence becomes powerful enough to never be forgotten.